First tonight, the head of Ukraine's military, General Alexander Syrskyi, has warned that the Russian invaders are building up their forces on the eastern front near Pokrovsk. He warned of a difficult situation around the city as Moscow claims to have taken another nearby village, Olivka. General Syrskyi said Moscow was trying to disrupt the supply lines of the Ukrainian defenders. But he also claimed Kyiv was managing to draw Russian troops away from other parts of Ukraine, notably the south, into the Kursk region of Russia, where a Ukrainian incursion is now 3 weeks old. He said Ukraine now held 100 settlements in Kursk and had captured 600 Russian servicemen. Meanwhile, President Zelensky says a second consecutive night of massive Russian air attacks has killed 4 people and injured 16. Ukraine's air defenses say all of the country is under the threat of a Russian weapons ballistic attack. Sirens wailed across the country as Russian missiles closed in, and blasts were heard in at least 7 major cities. A statement from the Russian Defense Ministry said long-range air and sea-based precision weaponry had been used to strike power stations and related infrastructure across Ukraine. The huge barrage fired by Moscow has been condemned by President Biden as outrageous, and President Zelensky said Western allies must do more to protect Ukraine from Russian drones and missiles.
The Kursk operation led to Sumy and Chernihiv regions to not being occupied. Moreover, it destroyed a large number of Russian troops. I don't know if the commander-in-chief spoke today about the number of the enemy. They probably didn't go into detail, and it's probably still too early to talk about it. A large number of troops was defeated. The fact that they, Russians, don't withdraw their troops from the Donetsk region yet. It's obvious why they keep their most prepared troops there, and it is their strategic direction. They really want to occupy our Donetsk region. This objective hasn't changed for them since the beginning of the war, I'd say since the beginning of the Great War. This objective has existed since 2014.
Well, for his assessment, let's cross live to London and speak with Arise European Affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Good to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. So new waves of Russian attacks, the largest aerial assault on Ukraine since the war began more than 2 years ago. What are you hearing about the situation in Ukraine this evening?
Well, the situation is that, precisely as the Ukrainians have said, the Russians are massing and are going forward into the Donetsk basin, which is indeed their key strategic goal. And they are advancing there. Simultaneously, of course, the incursion into the Kursk region is succeeding, and they have managed to capture some more land and prisoners. However, the question is which of the two is the more serious, and obviously it's the Donetsk basin, because that is very important for Ukraine, whereas the Kursk region is only of marginal significance for Russia.
And just looking at those aerial attacks on Ukraine, Ukraine's air defense forces have said that the whole country is under threat of a ballistic weapons attack from Russia. Do we know how successful the Ukrainians have been in intercepting those missiles and drones? I mean, there are reports that they had to use newly arrived F-16 fighter jets to try to intercept and repel some of those Russian missiles.
Quite right. The problem is the Russians undoubtedly are striking targets. We can all see that. They have a whole range of missiles ranging from the hypersonic to the drone, and they are using them. They're using them for 3 reasons. A, to punish Ukraine, I think, for the incursion, which is very humiliating for them. Secondly, to show the incursion has no real effect. It's not going to be a buffer of any sort, unlike what President Zelensky said. But thirdly, simply to try and bring Ukraine to its knees. And that is why it's striking at these targets to sap the morale of the Ukrainian people. And this, of course, over the course of the 2 years, there has been some notable lowering of morale, which was reboosted after the incursion. And so the Russians are now trying to lower the morale again.
And in that regard, we understand that the Russians have been targeting airfields where the Ukrainians have parked the F-16 fighter jets, which finally arrived from its allies. They've also been targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, with the damage said to be colossal. I understand that Ukraine has lost about half of its electricity generating capacity. How much of a struggle will it be to recover and rebuild that infrastructure?
Well, interestingly, we have the lesson from Germany during World War II, which was bombed by the British, amongst others. It is possible to recover to some extent. The key problem is, will the bombing, in this case missiling, of Ukraine continue? The damage itself could be put right reasonably well, given time. But if the Russians insist on bombing and rebombing these areas, then therefore it will be hard to put them right. And that will mean that Ukraine faces an unpleasant winter.
And just, you know, today and a few days previously, you were talking about that Ukrainian incursion into Russian territory as a big boost for Kyiv in its attempt to create a buffer zone to protect its cities and towns. I mean, how much is this massive Russian aerial assault likely to be seen as a major setback for Ukraine in that pursuit, without making you repeat yourself too much?
Indeed, it is a major setback, to the point where, as far as I can tell, President Zelensky and none of the generals mention it anymore. The Russians have shown up this whole notion of there being a buffer region to try and stop Russia missile Ukraine to be totally useless. And therefore, from this respect, the incursion has no value at all. The only value left to it now is that peace bargaining, if you like. And the problem here is that the incursion, of course, actually broke down peace talks which were going on unofficially. So from that point of view, it has not been a success either. However, it has boosted Ukrainian morale, and assuming that Ukraine can hold on to this in that respect would have been probably worthwhile. But as a buffer zone against Russian missiles, it is useless.
Well, let me then press you on the other point you made, which is the issue of peace talks. The other aim of that incursion, as you have told us, over the last few days, was to try to force Russia to the negotiating table by taking the battle to its people so it can negatively affect them as well. How do you assess that now in light of this latest Russian assault?
I think it's a total failure in that respect, unfortunately. The problem is there were unofficial peace talks because there was an air of stalemate down in the southeastern region because Ukraine had a great many troops there. Ukraine having split its forces means the Russian advancing in the Donetsk region, so therefore there's no stalemate there. Secondly, the peace talks broke down because, of course, the Russians would refuse to talk whilst the Ukrainians were attacking them. And thirdly, it is very hard to see precisely what the Ukrainians are going to gain from having this area of Russian territory, which I repeat is minuscule compared to the whole of Russia's size. It is perhaps a humiliation and embarrassment, but as a bargaining tool, it is very limited. And what is more, should it ever fall, it will be a hammer blow for Ukrainian morale.
And just to go back to the point you made earlier, and in fact you predicted some of this a few days earlier, there's been this very downbeat assessment from the head of Ukraine's military, we heard him earlier on the program, about the situation in the east of Ukraine, and particularly around the strategically important town of Pokrovsk and the Russian buildup there. So the Ukrainians admitting that the Russians are managing to advance in that Donetsk and Donbass region and seem poised to seize large parts of it, if not the entire region.
That is unfortunately the prediction which looks likely to be realized. First and foremost, they already on Tuesday, the Ukrainians state everyone should flee these towns. Secondly, of course, the Russians have been advancing. And should they take the Donetsk region, it will be a very major defeat for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians can't stop the advance. They lack the forces because they've split them. Some, of course, are in the incursion area. There are some arms arriving from the west, but they're not enough to stop the Russian attack as it stands. So we are now possibly looking in September at a very unpleasant situation whereby Russia gains two towns, another whole region, and therefore, as a result, will be seen to be winning this war, which is, of course, the very thing that Ukraine should be trying to prevent.
And as always, we're grateful for your analysis. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is Arise European Affairs analyst. He was talking to me on the line there from London. Thank you very much.